Uhuru, welcome to the breakdown, being brought to you by the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, a mass organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Sorry about the technical delays, but the breakdown is a monthly news, analysis, and opinion program, as well as a platform for highlighting guests whose issues spotlight the international plight of colonized women struggling under colonialism. My name is Coco Lewis. I will be one of your co-hosts for today's broadcast. I'm joined by our host Yejide Oramila, of the African president of the African National Women's Organization, AMWO, our producer Jay Amiche, and coming soon, Alikia Ingoma, who is the editor of the Burning Spear and also our Haitian expert. Today's breakdown will share news from the African world, highlighting recent struggles in Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Congo, Kenya, and Haiti. We are streaming live on YouTube channels for the Burning Spear TV and the African National Women's Organization, also on Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. Who we're presenting yesterday, and Jay. I'm excited about today's discussion. Let's jump into it.
Okay, Uhuru, really
Yoo-hoo.
excited to have this program. And I just first want to open to say that the African National Women's Organization are doing these broadcasts because we believe that African women have to be engaged in um, the information superhighway, so to speak, around and narratives that define how people see and interact with African people. And we believe also that this is a strategy to we also believe that this is going to help build up the political dexterity of African women and people who actually see this as well, and contribute to the forwarding of the African Revolution. So I'm really excited about talking about what's going on in the African world. I think it's really important. It's a lot of things, a lot of things that is happening right now, and we expect that we can give some insight, but also share, what has to be done in order to really gain our liberation. So I appreciate Comrade Coco and Jay, and soon Comrade Alikia. So we just want to really open up the program, just highlighting some important struggles. I can get started with it. You've been seeing me, if you've been following us on social media, you've been seeing me talk about um, the genocide in Sudan, and more. I'll be talking more about also what's going on in the Congo, also another genocide. But I think it's really important that people see that these what seem like interscene violence, Black people just can't get along and figure out how to govern, and we have to really get rid of this idea that Black people just want to kill each other in mass. And not only that, like, there's millions of African people being wiped off the face of the planet right now, during these struggles. And we will not believe that it's because we ourselves wanted to commit these genocides based on just ethnic identities. And if we're talking about ethnicities and things like that, then we have to really talk about the foundation of that, which is the colonial exploitation and domination of the places that we're talking about: Congo, Sudan, Mali, Niger. All of these places had hundreds of years of European colonialism that has done what it's in Africa, what it's done around the world. And so it planted the seed, it fosters these divisions, it arms one group over the other while it's saying to the world that they want peace. And, there is a lot more intricacies to what's happening on the African continent. And so, for those of you who don't know, because it's really not as out there as some other things, but Sudan is, there's the Sudanese armed forces, the rapid security forces that are led by two different components of the African petty bourgeoisie, who worked together back in 2018, I believe, to remove Omar Bashir from office in Sudan. But they are struggling for power in the Sudan now, to be able to be the top ranking Negroes, to coordinate efforts with the U.S. and other imperialist forces that are working in the Sudan and in Africa at the moment. And we know that from history and from looking at the whole scope of the African continent, that there's a benefit to being the one and only solitary coordinator of um, because coordinator of all of these all of the imperialist driven goals. But we have to understand that Sudan is no different. There, for us, we've been seeing African women on the front lines who've been victims of rape and violence, children who are being displaced. And I really cannot stand, I don't know about y'all, but I cannot stand seeing this victimization of African women all the time, like we are hopeless victims, that we don't organize and fight back. And they're definitely in examples of African women who are who are fighting back, who are organizing themselves. But what we see often is just this sad African woman, and I think that it's because I know that it's because that the petty bourgeoisie and the and the imperialists are using that as the basis for saying, see, this is why we got to go there. But I don't know. What do you think? What do you all think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like you said, the colonizers have a rich history of, dividing and conquering, and that has bled into the geopolitics of today. And I think that's also coupled with the constant dehumanization of Black people, which makes it seem like we're naturally prone, to violence, to war. Meanwhile, if you actually look at, like, they've plotted out, every conflict from the past 5,000 years. And in that map, when you see it plotted out, it's like, cluster bomb, on Europe, and then sparsely everywhere else. But the amount of conflicts that have happened on European soil, just it's a number that dwarfs any other number on any other continent, right, other than, I mean, the US is involved in a lot of conflict, but even on our own soil, like, there wasn't as much war. So if anyone's a warring people or a violent people, it would be the Europeans. But because of the dehumanization of Black people, you see that reversed and switched, and we're made to be out as these naturally violent people, when in fact it's a lot of times there was usually peace before the Europeans came in and divided people up and turned them against each other.
Yeah, I think when we look at that, I mean, it's hard to see. It's hard to really gauge, like, when you see African people who are heads of state and things like that, and they're coordinating this violence and orchestrating Black people who are coordinating the violence. It's really hard to blame the white man because that's what you're confronted by. You're confronted by these Black people who are carrying the guns, who are killing, torturing, maiming other African people because they are vying for power. But we have to understand that, like there are also, we also have to understand these are instruments of the colonizer. These are instruments of U.S. imperialism. Just like the African who might kill you in the streets here is an instrument of the coordinated, calculated conditioning that has happened to African people over hundreds and hundreds of years of being dominated. And I think it's also important to say that in the Sudan, not only are there millions of people who are not just in Sudan, but totally in Congo and Sudan, where there's high instances of violence, that there are millions of people who are being murdered. But also there's a more important thing that's happening, in that the land itself is being cleared out. There's a huge exodus from these places, Sudan being resource rich. And we already know Congo was the heart of Africa. When the Europeans were here looking at Africa, it was just like, Congo is the heart of Africa, and it continues to be the heart of Africa with all of the resources. And so there is a huge exodus from these places. People are not even concerned about making revolution or solving these problems when you are fighting for your lives and just trying to establish safety for yourself. And so when you're clearing out these huge plots of land, which is what this is, then you just clear the way for you to do anything that you want to do here. And that's just been the strategy over and over and over again.
Uhuru, I just want to, step in here because we know from Penny Hess, the head of the African People's Solidarity movement that in her book Overturning
Cultural violence.
Cultural Violence, that where there's poverty is where there's going to be horizontal violence. So like this, Sudan started as a economic inflation, economic crisis. And so that's when you get people fighting over resources. We know from Chairman O'Malley that, again, poverty, we start fighting over resources, fighting over power. And that creates a breeding, and that is institutionalized and strategic in its own right. And that creates this like fertile ground for capitalists and colonialism and imperialism to come in and be the saviors of it through aid, but really that's just a cloak of imperialism to come in, like you said, clear the land, because you have almost 2 million people being displaced and over 12,000 people, murdered through this, this war between what appears to be, horizontal Sudanese against Sudanese. And then they're able to even furthermore cloak it into the war on terrorism, because you not only are these people African, but they also is an Arab country, so they are Islamic in belief system. So yeah, it's ridiculous. We have to unite.
Yeah. Sudan is not an Arab country, despite how many people they think they Arab. FYI.
Arab. Yeah, I'm saying Arab because it's an Islamic
African people who speak Arabic and may worship Islam and practice Islam, but this is not Arab. This is African people who have been divided on so many lines. And I think we should look at like that identity thing too, because it's always identity politics that they put forward on the continent of Africa. It's either your ethnic group or your religion, or these are the things that are going to be antagonistic and cause people to fight. I mean, it's ridiculous when you think about it, but when you see where power was placed, when you see where power was protected, not placed from the former direct colonial rule, and when you see how it was protected to ensure that these particular people, and these people then are upholding that relationship that they have with the colonizer, which is what the people who maybe have been blocked out of that are fighting to end, so that it can equalize society. But instead of what you have as a narrative is just that there are people who are just the Hutus and Tutsis, even though that's not in Sudan, but like, whatever the groups are in Sudan, these are the Arabs, Muslims, and the Black Africans. I saw an article or a video where they were saying where they were showing that the rapid security forces were in part of South Sudan or on the cusp, when they were calling the blacks, the Sudanese in that part of the sector, niggers. And I'm just like, and that would inflate. That would also, if you weren't educated about, who the people in Sudan are, then as somebody looking at that, if you have a revulsion to that word, you're like, oh, I'm going to be on this side because those sides are targeting Black people, so-called Black people in Sudan. And it's just propaganda. And it's just a strategy of because that was on, I think, an African news site, and then I think it was carried by, the bourgeois media. So, what's happening in Sudan is tragic. Like the chairman said earlier, that nothing is new. Like there's always been the significant casualties for African people. In the meeting I was just in before this, chairman was talking about, that 1 in 3 of the 600 million people on the continent of Africa were killed in the process of making us into enslaved people. So there's always been like these high casualty counts with African people. And despite all of these high casualty counts, everything else becomes a genocide except for what's happening to African people. Everything else becomes prioritized in that way. But we can't be fooled by the same people who are genociding us, like the U.S. colonial rule, China, Russia, all of these places who don't even care about our lives, but only care about geopolitical positioning on the continent of Africa, because they're in contention with one another. China, Russia, and France and all of the former direct colonial states are also only really interested in, gaining political footing on the continent of Africa. It's a scramble. It's a scramble.
Yeah. And, I was also thinking about how the current conflict in Sudan really reminds us of the importance of being vigilant in terms of like liberatory movements, because, they, I think it was in 2019, right? They threw out the 30-year dictator who was, a Western puppet, as they often are. And there was a lot of opportunity to really like equalize society and all sorts of things, but there was a lot of foreign interference, as there always is. And it was really the foreign interference that armed the different factions. Like, paramilitaries don't arm themselves. Where do they get the money and the weapons to take on governments and coups? Like, it comes from a lot of foreign interference and often capitalist interests. So that is really what has led to this moment where we're seeing mass displacement, sexual violence, and and as you mentioned, these huge casualties. There's usually a line that you can trace between capitalist US dollars and a humanitarian crisis of some kind, or a genocide of some kind. There's almost always a straight line between colonial interests and these conflicts that come up. So in our own liberatory struggles, it's like we have to think, it's not just over when we overthrow whoever, if
Right.
really the work is, rebuilding a society so that these interests cannot wield the same kind of power and influence to just be able to throw money at paramilitaries and start a genocide whenever they find it convenient. So I think a lot about that interference that really led to this moment.
You have to make that impossible, and that can't happen, in my view, in 54 different Africas, because I was also looking at, what's the Eastern African states doing? They're like throwing their hands up and just like, I don't F with Sudan. Like some of these places like Somalia, Ethiopia, I don't F with Sudan. We got problems. And then like the African Union isn't doing anything. They're actually forwarding this campaign with the US AFRICOM process. They're actually organizing against the terrorist threat in Africa. The terrorist threat in Africa is the U.S. imperialism.
Correct.
It's
imperialism.
You know what I mean? That's the terrorist threat in Africa. Because but they're being coordinated by the terrorists.
Food.
Yeah, they're being coordinated by the terrorists to hunt so-called African terrorists to stave the flow of, I guess, Islamist influence on the African continent. But the reason why Islamists exist is because of U.S. imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
Point blank, period. The reason, I'm not saying that every Islamist faction that's out here that's, fighting or trying to cause commotion somewhere is like upstanding. But I'm also saying that these sort of crises that are happening and popping up around the African continent is a result of U.S. imperialism, of French imperialism, of all the Western imperialist powers and then meddling in Africa. And the only way that they're going to get kicked out is through a unified Africa. You can't make it, and the fact that these conflicts are happening so close together in these different countries, that just shows you the power of how the borders help to create this positioning of this playground where everybody else is scrambling for Africa and geopolitical positioning. But if it was one united Africa, one united army, we would be able to say, and one united socialist agenda, which is to keep peace on the African continent, then the priorities for us wouldn't be necessarily terrorism, which is less of a crisis than the huge humanitarian crisis that is currently happening right now, where hundreds of millions of African people are being pushed out of Africa. It's incredible, how as African people not as African people but the neo-colonial powers are able to coordinate with the imperialists to meet their own interests and the interests of the peoples it's just being cannon fodder in this war for, geopolitical power and supremacy in Africa.
Yeah, there was one thing you said about, the colonial powers supposedly, fighting terrorism, when they can be doing other things. And I think it's important to recognize that these colonial powers are, the work that they're doing is not the solution to terrorism as they say it is. It's actually the cause of terrorism.
Correct.
And the general of Niger, what's his name? General, I'm gonna butcher his name. I have it written down, but it's General Abdurrahmani Chiani. I think that's how, I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, he just had a press conference a few days ago, and he directly accused Europe of fanning the flames of terrorism. And he said before, like, in 2002, 8,000 lives in the area were lost to terrorism. And that wasn't the case before France and its NATO partners came in. And, they came in. This is what the general said a few days ago. And I agree. He said that they armed rebels in order to overthrow Gaddafi, as we all know, who advocated for unified Africa, as you said, and that act turned the whole country into a failed state. And then the rebels, all of a sudden, they're out of work, right? So they moved. They went to other places, and they're just wreaking death and destruction in their wake. And France is supposed to be doing all these anti-terrorism operations, but they're actually aiding and abetting the insurgents. And the Malian foreign minister requested an audience with the UN Security Council, and they claimed that French troops created an enclave in northern Mali and handed it over to a terrorist group called Ansar al-Din. So they're directly working with the terrorists, arming them, creating enclaves, protected enclaves for them, and whilst claiming that they're in the region for anti-terror operations.
Yeah, I think it's important too to understand, like there's no gun factory. I mean, as far as I know, there's no gun factories in Africa.
Okay.
In the African world, no way, not even in the island, not even owned by Black people. We are not arming our own, these conflicts. I was reading an article where they were saying that there's like an anti-aircraft like missile that was like, or a ship that was flying over some places. I'm like, where the hell they get this? Where do they get these? I mean, I know the answer to the question, but I'm just saying that if more people were to ask these questions, more particularly African people, like, where are these guns coming from? Where are all these weapons of mass destruction that is being funneled into Africa? And I also want to bring us to our attention, because I've been looking at the connection too between so-called U.S. aid to Africa, and I'm sure there's other aid agencies from different places, and I would probably need to dig that up too. But we're the biggest in Sudan. We're the biggest. We contribute the most humanitarian aid to Sudan than any other, country. We have the biggest budget for that, and we do it through our U.S. aid. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically a military extension, and they've contributed so far 18. I want to say billion, but I think it's million right now, right? 18 million, no, billion. It's billion. It's better with 18 million to Sudan to help with humanitarian aid, and they also always use African women.
That was my point. I was waiting for my window. They always use.
We're gonna ensure the equality of women in Sudan, and this is what this humanitarian, and we're gonna stop sexual violence. Are you kidding me? Like this, where is this money? And they don't name who their partners in Sudan is, but their partners in Sudan is the same people who are fighting against one another, and they're helping. And I believe, because we don't have evidence in front of me, so I believe that these resources that are going into Sudan are highly problematic and very unstable situation. You're now funneling money in one area and then saying you want peace. If you are like, that doesn't make any sense. At the same time that you are helping to support, when you're supporting the Zionist state of Israel in this war against the people in Palestine, there's, it doesn't equate when you're talking about aid to one place as opposed to the other, and who you're able to help. And it's always about the U.S.'s positioning of itself. It's never about the people in the population, but it's about itself. And I'm so glad you brought up the anti-terrorism thing in Sudan. I mean, not in Sudan, in Niger and Mali, because that's what happened with that's why the Sahel, what is it? The Sahel Alliance came to existence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And thinking about the Sahel Alliance, I know that it's basically fallen apart, which is incredible. I mean, the original one that France created, the Sahel Alliance, I mean, is the alternative to the one that France created. But what was it, G8 or whatever that France created, or G5, the G5 Sahel Alliance, basically has fallen apart. Niger, of course, dropped out. Mali, Burkina Faso were all like, bye, France. We don't want to be part of this. And then Mauritania and Chad, which were the two remaining members, were like, okay, why are we doing this? At this point, this looks ridiculous. And so they left too. And so, the G5 Sahel is basically, I mean, it doesn't exist really anymore. And that was another thing that was created to supposedly deal with the insecurity that happened after Gaddafi was ousted yet again. So again, has to do with the backing of rebels in Libya and the U.S. putting its grubby little fingers into that kind of leads back again to that. And Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger, when they left, they were very explicit about saying that the G5 Sahel was an instrument to further French interests, as we know. That's how they roll. Like, they're not concerned about Africans. Like, absolutely not. So, now it's pretty obvious that is definitely the case. And so the G5 Sahel's fallen apart, and instead now they've formed this new alliance where they're they're looking after themselves, as they should, because the interests of their people have been just discarded for so long. And I think that I'm really excited about it personally. And I think it's very interesting to see the difference between how they reacted when the Arab Spring was happening versus, Sahel Spring. There's all these, complaints about the instability and, oh, he seems so militant and this and that. But, the Arab Spring was a sign of freedom and all this stuff. But for us, it's like, oh no, it's a scary thing, the idea of us being free. And I'm like, you know what, though, they should be scared, because
exactly,
the interests of the Europeans are not going to be placed over the Africans anymore, and they're going to do what they need to do to keep their people fed and to continue being the land of upright people. That takes resources. When people are desperate, they do desperate things. And so I'm excited to see what comes out of that, because they've been so exploited for so long.
I'm also excited because I was you shared a webinar the other day, and I was and it was around and one of the administrators of the government, I think in some capacity, I think it was like the investment portion, was talking about like what Burkina Faso is doing to ensure its safety and encourage people to come and visit. And, like, we want people to come here. And I think that's important because the Sahel Alliance, the new ones formed by Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, is a defense alliance. It's like, if somebody attacks you, we consider that this is an attack against all of us. And we will. So this is an example of the militaries in these places forming an alliance and saying we are defending each other, as opposed to be coordinated by U.S. military, French military, and all the other militaries that are there. And I think that's really important. That's really important.
I love that they're just kind of throwing off the yoke of U.S. and European domination. Meanwhile, the Kenyan government is just throwing the yoke on voluntarily. Just, sure, you want me to be a colonial tool? Absolutely.
Can I tap dance now, sir?
Dancing. Like, oh, Israel committing a genocide. You need
people. You
be sharecroppers. You need some Africans for sharecropping.
Just volunteering their people to be oppressed.
It's just
it's
I mean, what is
disgusting? Wrong? It's disgusting. It is so disgusting.
Imagine seeing.
We're sharing a headline.
the whole world is just inspired by the strength of the Palestinian resistance. The whole colonized world is basically
Mhm.
coming together to express our support for the Gazan resistance. And meanwhile, Kenya and Malawi over here are
Are like,
dancing for Israel. Like,
oh,
what is this? It is wild to me. It's absolutely wild that, left and right people are throwing off the yoke of colonialism. And yeah, just Kenya is just, hey, you want us to go to Haiti for you? You want some
yes.
Africans to share crop? Just it is absolutely bizarre. And they have, like, there's so many problems that the Kenyan government should be focused on within Kenya. They don't need to be going to Haiti and messing with the people there, sending their people to the racist Israeli government. I mean, those poor people, like, they're using the desperation within the country to provide a workforce for genocidal government, like a racist genocidal government, like that is not going to treat them well. So I can't even imagine the kind of things that people that are going to experience. And thinking about the why don't they have a workforce right now? Well, the Palestinians, they normally exploit. All of their work visas were rejected and stopped immediately, when the October 7th happened.
Hmm.
And a lot of them were expelled from the region. And they had some of the Thai some of
Mhm.
the Thai workers as well. But it's interesting. I don't know if you all saw those videos where they were like high-fiving and like giving hugs to the fighters, to the Hamas fighters. Like, they were cool. And
Mhm.
the Israeli dude like dapped him up. Like, do you remember seeing those videos?
Yes,
They
yes,
had a good relationship. They were like, these people are cool. Like, and then a lot of those hostages actually spoke really terribly about the Israeli government after that. And they were like, yeah, the Hamas people are actually like, they've kept us safe. They're
Right.
actually pretty cool. And, they let us know that, they only took us because there's thousands of Palestinians that are, missing in infinite detention, and they're just trying to free their own people. And so those Thai workers, a lot of them, when they were freed, went back home. But basically they don't have this huge workforce anymore of
Workforce.
exploited workers. So they turn to Africans, as they often do, as these countries, these white supremacist countries often do. They turn to Africans when, they need workers, when they need, drones to do manual labor,
Hmm.
so they can exploit us. It's ridiculous.
Well, Kenya, even internally, culturally, they have banned traditional wear from their government institutions. You can't. I'm like, you,
Those wigs, I swear to God, the parliament wigs. I will never get over that. Like,
ever,
how
ever.
internalized do you have to have your feelings of colonization have to be to willingly put one of those things on and not see it as ridiculous?
I
Like,
mean,
I could not, in my spirit, I couldn't, I would have to throw it off. Like, it
yeah.
just
right.
doesn't sit right with me at all. Those dumb wigs.
I really want to know what the average Kenyan citizen believes about these. Like, because you have your country really betraying your culture.
Well,
Is
we see it because the Kenyan people are demonstrating against Israel. They're doing boycotts.
hmm
They're supporting the Gazan struggle for liberation because, like, for so many people who have been oppressed by their own governments, this is an example of what you do when you resist, and it's powerful, and it encapsulates the spirits and the minds of so many people all over the planet. And for Kenyan's government, I mean, this is more motivation, I would think, for Kenyans who are seeking to overthrow their government, to be like, these jokers, these Uncle Ruckus, we the uncle, I keep saying we the Uncle Ruckus of
right,
Africa. That's what Kenya is, the Uncle Ruckus. If you don't know this term, Google it. Uncle Ruckus
right.
of Africa.
Watch some Boondocks.
It's some sellout stuff. And so being able to, say that, yes, I will offer up my workers for you to take, and I will offer up my military as an ad hoc force to go to Haiti.
Yes.
And their land. They've been offering up their land.
Their
They
land.
evicted all those indigenous Kenyans that have been living off that land for generations. They evicted all those people. I have nowhere to go. I watched the saddest video of these people crying because the land that has been a part of their people for so long, they're being forced off of it because the land was sold to colonial capitalist interests, to foreign investors. And so they're even selling off the land piece by piece and portraying the indigenous Kenyans who have lived on that land and harmoniously for so long. And that land's just going to be like extracted to high hell. And it's probably going to be some environmental degradation, or it'll probably be a safari park where rich white people can go and shoot at lions and stuff. You know what I mean? But like, that is the nature of much conservation, quote unquote, stuff, is it evicting indigenous people off the land. So white conservationists can come and have their playground of nature that they get to be lord over. And it's absolutely absurd that that governments actually allow for that and support that against the will of their people.
And we should also look at like this whole idea of Israel, and with, I'm sure, the help of the U.S., because they are in direct coordination with Kenya. Correct. Turning to Africa for a labor force. This does not sound familiar to folks. Like, Israel is a European settler colonial state. I mean, if they need somebody to work the land of the formerly exploited, people who are now fighting back, they need to go to Europe, where they came from, and go find some workers who's going to farm that land. But they can't. Correct. They can't. Because they always have a reserve in the places that they are working together to exploit. There's always going to be some desperate African, some desperate, other colonized force somewhere who's going to risk their life and limbs, to try to make resources for their family. I mean, this is the reason why we're here in the United States. Part of that is because they stole our foreparents, and now we're here. But also, a lot of Africans are coming to the U.S. because of the wars in Sudan, the wars in Congo, economic instability. Why would we leave Africa? I mean, Africa was the most hospitable place to live on the face of the planet. Europe was in crisis. They was experiencing the Black Plague. They was eating each other. And then Africans was up here. We didn't even have to develop weapons of mass destruction. We had the weapons of mass destruction that we had was a bow and an arrow, maybe some swords. You know what I'm saying? But white people became advanced. They have cannons, and because they were destroying one another. And African people were just like, we just trying to get some positioning somewhere or some other land. But the weapons of mass destruction.
Africans are making like aqueducts and libraries and shit, you know what I mean? Like religious, beautiful religious architecture and, schools of learning. And that's what they were spending the excess resources of their society on, not, weapons of war and destruction.
So we have to see what was taken from us, and that this is not, in my understanding, this is not intrinsic. What's happening in Africa in terms of like this interscene violence and the so-called terrorism, this is not intrinsic to African people. It was brought there by the colonizer. It was King Leopold of Belgium, who wiped out millions of African people, maimed millions of African people, and had Congo as his own protectorate and used Congo as his own plantation. And it was him that really laid the groundwork for this concept of genocide on the continent of Africa. And since then, they want to act like we don't know why Black people are killing each other, because you set the tone, people. And because you are always, it's like a scab that you won't allow to heal. You keep picking at it. And this is what all of these foreign interventions are doing. And I'm not saying just militarily too. It's the NGOs, it's the charities, it's the missionaries, all of these people who come from Europe, the humanitarians, the philanthropists, all of them working in Africa are a part of the strategy to undermine African self-determination.
Yeah.
Yep. And, I was thinking about like how, speaking of missionaries, there's an abundance of these religious figures that, have this shadow tax-free money from their church businesses, which is, billion-dollar booming industry, the church industry in the US, and especially the white evangelical political and capitalist machine, which go hand in hand. They control the politics to bolster their economic interests, and they it's tax free because they're clergy and stuff, and then they use a lot of that money to go into Africa and in places like Ghana and Uganda and other places, and advocate for things like death penalty and harsh punishments for LGBTQ people. And traditionally, Africa had many different notions of gender. There was no sort of like, obviously men and women, the understanding of men and women was everywhere. And they also, many places had third genders, had, different understandings of genders before colonization. And so this idea that like, Africa is naturally, homophobic, or that accepting of different of styles of gender is not African, or is some kind of like sort of imperialist ideology, is just not true, because there's literally like missionaries and evangelicals who are spending millions to help pass these horrendous laws that they can never get passed in the US because the people here would never allow it. But they go over there and use their millions of dollars to advocate for these things. And it's absolutely wild that they get to do all of this like tax free, like the government's gonna come after me for taxes, even though I don't make really any money. But the churches that make billions of dollars, like stealing from people and lying to people, they get to keep all of that without, any consequences. It's wild to me. Absolutely wild.
I was in my father's room the other day, and he was watching he watched Africa TV all the time. So I'd be walking in and I'd be like, I can't. It's all neo-colonialism. It's like, my skin crawls. I'm just like, oh. And he was watching something where it was I don't know exactly, it was some African head of state talking about some law in their country where they were going to target and criminalize homosexuality. And I was like, with all the things,
correct.
with all the things you should criminalize, that's the thing you're gonna criminalize? With all the things that we need to do to organize ourselves and our people and to create safety and peace and everything for our people, this the thing you focusing on, brother. And that's why you can't, like, you have to oust all of these neo-colonial leaders in Africa. Period. Like, there's no salvation. There is no turning these people who hold on to power for 50 years into advocates of Africa and allowing them to make decisions unilaterally around the who's going to vote on what election. I mean, it's really criminal. That's why you have to have the forward revolutionary progressive motion of the people who are going to put people in power, who's going to represent our interests. But in saying that, that's a dangerous thing to do. And that's why these governments, these imperialists are always in Africa working, navigating, undermining, funding, people who are for the interest of, U.S. imperialism or something else. They're always working. Like I've been following U.S. Africa relations, and since that U.S. Africa conference in the U.S. that led by President Biden and Kamala Harris, them folks, they've been whining and dining them African leaders, boy, talking about, we're going and throwing money everywhere in Africa. And some people who don't know what's happening in Africa might be saying, oh, this is great. The U.S. is finally ensuring, helping us secure peace, and they're doing anything, and this written on their websites, is written in the documents, anything that the U.S. does anywhere else in the world is for U.S. interest, period. It's never for the interest of the people or places that they're using those resources to maneuver. And when we look at, and it also strengthens, like, they don't want Africa to fall into communism.
And that's part of the reason why they support a lot of these initiatives. They support not only these initiatives that are, anti-LGBTQ, anti-women, all that sort of thing, and they also support entire governments that are for example, like religious governments, you often see that because they see that as a tool against the more progressive parties. They think that by propping up, and this is exactly what they did with Hamas in Israel, where there was a Palestinian, more progressive Palestinian organizations and explicitly communist and socialist ones that were gaining in popularity and gaining in power. And so Israel gave resources to Hamas in order to be able to, defeat the leftist organizations because they were gaining too much popularity. And then when Hamas became the most powerful party, then suddenly now they're like, well, oh no, these terrorists. But it's like, well, you were funding the terrorists the whole time. You set up a whole payment scheme with Qatar to make sure that they were getting the most funding out of any of the parties. And now suddenly, oh, they're these terrorists that have to be defeated. What does that say about Israel if they're the ones that are the main source of support for what they're now considering to be terrorists? Right.
But that's the history of these colonizers. They prop up they create the terrorist organization, like they did in Afghanistan. They created the Taliban.
Oh yeah, and supported the Mujahideen like for so long, and then when the Mujahideen became the Taliban, it was like, oh no. So what did you think was gonna happen?
I have to do more research, but I was seeing this article, this video about the Israel created Hamas to control the people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they didn't create them, but they were like the main sort of source of support. Correct. Like Hamas existed, but they were pretty fringe because at the time, and still are, most people just aren't that religious, right? Like most people don't want a religious government. Mm-hmm. Even people that are religious often don't want a religious government. So they were more of a fringe party, and the socialists and the communist parties were quite popular. Mm-hmm. And because of that, Israel funded at the beginning of Hamas, really funded and supported and put a lot of resources into making sure that Hamas became the dominant party. Correct. And now that they're the dominant party, it's suddenly, oh no, they're terrorists. But it's like, we're the one that made them what they are. So
that's why.
What does that say about Israel then?
That's why when we have to be very careful when the U.S. uses, and the Western imperialism uses the term terrorism. It's such a broad term, and terrorism really just mean people who, in my view, who are anti, establishment, and it could be anti-U.S. It could be used to undermine your particular control over a particular area. And again, I don't know what all the nuances are, but terrorism is fostered and supported and allowed to happen because of the disorganization of these foreign actors in the continent of Africa.
Yeah. The ANC were quote unquote terrorists until suddenly they weren't, and the Mau Mau were terrorists until suddenly they weren't, and the fighters in former Rhodesia were terrorists until suddenly they weren't. And so they've used these labels over and over and over again for people that are fighting for their own freedom and fighting for self-determination and resisting colonial violence in their areas. They always use that terminology. Mm-hmm. And I mean, especially since September 11th, it's been weaponized against specifically, African and also Northern African, Middle Eastern people as well, in order to control the people and make it seem that anything is acceptable. Like once you throw the terrorism label, then suddenly everything is nothing's off the table. You can do anything and everything to them because they're terrorists, and you can never negotiate with terrorists. You can any amount of violence is always justified because they're terrorists who hate us for our lifestyle or hate the way we are, not because of the geopolitical influence of our country over the entire world. Not that, never that. And never that, always because they hate our freedoms or whatever. They hate our freedom.
They hate the fact that the U.S. is so free. Nobody, I'm
like, I've been to the U.S. because no one I know feels free. Everyone feels actually quite enslaved a little bit,
And I think that when we look at like Israel, we're talking about Africa, but we also talk about the U.S. influence on, because we're talking about the Middle East. We're really talking about Africa, to be quite honest, right? And so the influence that but the imperial powers created the Middle East, and they've created the enemies of the Middle East. This is why it's so important for them to get ground in these places, and that's why Israel is so important. So people like chanting in the streets trying to figure out why is our U.S. representative not listening to us? And why after all these protests, U.S. President Biden is saying we're going to double down and send more money to Israel because because it's in their interest to keep Israel so that they can act as the police in that region. Yeah. Period. It's in the interest of the U.S. So whatever's in the interest of the U.S., despite the fact that it is not in the interest of people who are actually being maimed, harmed, obliterated, then that's what's going to happen. So we have to realize when we're talking about imperialism that there is no saving grace except for the ones that we create ourselves. And so that means we have to oust the neo-colonial rulers. That means that we have to build revolutionary organizations that are going to
yeah, and thinking about a lot of this is not actually I agree with you, and also a lot of it is not in the interest of the US. Right. It's in the interest of specific war profiteers who are not beholden to any nationality that might live in the US or Europe, but really they're just, they're these world powers that can enact influence in multiple places and often have multiple nationalities, often have US and Israel or France and US nationalities. But it's in their specific interest because, as we've seen, the houselessness has skyrocketed. The amount of people that are struggling to keep their homes has skyrocketed. Food insecurity has skyrocketed. So, we can say that, these things are for the interest of the U.S. government or whatever, but it's really in the interest of these specific, war profiteers and like weapons manufacturers and other different types of. And it's not just weapons manufacturers. Do you know that the number one food ration in World War II was? Guess. You're never gonna guess.
Rice.
Powdered milk.
Hershey's chocolate.
You know how much I did hear
chocolate makes off of war? I'm not even kidding. So it's things that you wouldn't even think that are war profiteers, but there are so many different industries that that have these contracts with these defense contracts that make their money off of conflict and violence, and it often comes at the expense of U.S. interests because our country, even for the politicians right now, we're full of contradictions and it's making the country really unstable. And a lot of these politicians are really scared of losing their seats, which who knows if they're going to or not. But I mean, luckily for them, our electoral system is pretty much rigged. So they, even despite most of the people hating all the options, these people still get elected. But who knows how long that's going to last, given how upset people are getting, and the contradictions are sharpening, and it's only a matter of time before this war profiteering and supporting of specific corporate interests over the will of the people won't. There's only a matter of time before we just stop accepting it and build something new while burning down the old, of course. But yeah, building something new is like everyone knows right now that things have to change. We cannot continue. Literally, the world is on fire. We cannot continue with business as usual, and everybody sees that. And so, like you said, it's really important that we create something. We have to do it. We have to be the ones to do it. It's not going to be like some future generation or the Gen Z or, you can't point at anyone else but yourself. It has to be us, or it's going to be no one.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important that we have the African National Women's Organization, because this programming is just an example of what political education that we have to do and all of other types of things that we have to do in order to prepare ourselves to deal with these very strategic and very sometimes often confusing sort of world situations and how it impacts. And also, you think as African women whose faces and bodies are often commodified and used as the basis for imperialist intervention, we have to make sure that we don't allow that, and that the struggles that are happening be identified as imperialist based and rooted struggles, and that come at our expense. And so it's really important that when we build organization, that we have African women in mind, and that if there's an African man in this or a non-African woman who is in this chat, next time you need to invite your African woman friend to participate in this live too, and really joining into this discussion to really forward, this political analysis that, we got to get free. And it's not going to be negotiating with this charity. I saw like there's a lot of fundraisers for Sudan. There ain't no fundraiser for Gaza. I mean, I don't know. Like it seems like, I'm like, where is this fundraising money going to Sudan? You know what I mean? Like,
So,
and what is, like, is this going to fix the problem on the ground? I mean, I know it's going to help alleviate some of the contradictions, maybe, if depending on where the money comes from. But the way that we approach solving the problem, or even talking about Sudan and Congo, is very different from how we approach talking about, the Palestine or anything like that. It's really just like, oh, these poor Black people are being attacked by Black people, so we should create a fund that's going to help them alleviate that. But the fundamental contradiction still exists, that these warring factions of the African petty bourgeoisie will remain in power unless somebody overturns them. Even if one of them wins and comes out and emerges, there's going to be another crisis. There will be another crisis inevitably. And There's going to be more Black people who are killed.
Yeah. And, we can't just throw money at stuff. And I think that, in the US, that's often people's first go-to. It's like, oh, that's terrible. Here, let's do a GoFundMe. And it's like, one of the things you said was like, you don't really see that in Gaza. But I think at the beginning of when all this was started happening, you did have a lot of people say that. You did have a lot of people be like, donate here. And then you would see also other people being like, the money is not getting to them. Right. Like, stop donating money. It's not getting to them. There's a blockade. And, we've seen the videos now at this point of, people breaking into storehouses that are storing all this food while the people are starving. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the money is going into, or all the trucks on the border with all the food spoiling because, Israel won't let them in. So it's like we've seen all of this. So we know that you can't just like throw money for Gaza, because the people are not going to get what they need out of it. And what has to happen is we need to be willing to put our bodies on the line, and our careers and our jobs, if necessary, on the line, to really disrupt business as usual, and not let these politicians just get away with it. Just show up wherever they show up, reminding them that they're supporting a genocide, that there's blood on their hands. And we need to be doing the same thing for, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Congo. Right. I saw an action recently in, I think, Montreal, where they were basically chained themselves to an Apple store. And I'm like, there are Apple stores in every city. There are Black people in every city. Like, we should be doing that. We should be chaining ourselves to these Apple stores, because that is like, those are bloody electronics, just like there's blood diamonds. There's like, bloody electronics, that stuff is getting mined from the Congo and going straight into these fancy products that are costing us an arm and a leg. And meanwhile,
those $2 to $3 a day.
Right, exactly. The profits aren't getting to them. They're doing this extremely dangerous work for little to no pay, and they're subject to all sorts of, of violence and exploitation as a result of it. And I mean, we need to start putting our bodies on the line. Like, we need to start as a people, just really saying that we're not going to continue with business as usual. But that also requires an extra step that you don't necessarily need for Gaza, which is to change our whole lifestyles, to not depend as much on computers. Because that's the problem, is like, I'm sitting here right now. I mean, I have an iPhone. I'm on my MacBook. I have an iPad. And yeah, like, I'm totally down to go to the Apple store and, blockade myself. And also, if my phone breaks at the protest, I'll be at that Apple store the next day getting it fixed. You know what I mean? So like there's a fundamental step that has to happen around changing our relationship to these products, so we're not as dependent on them. And I think that's the thing that is the hard part.
I don't know if we stop being dependent on them. Yes. I think that we have to understand that we have to control the resources as opposed to, you know what I'm saying? Like, we should be the most technically advanced people on the face of the planet, because all of the things that create these electronics come out of Africa. Yeah. And I would say that the question is, yes, we should boycott the fact that, the Apple has a monopoly. Really, all the tech companies have access to these places around in Africa, and particularly in the Congo, where the coltan is mined. But the fact that the coltan belongs to the people.
To the people, correct.
Right. It's the people. And so the fundamental act for me is overturning our relationship with the coltan and the mining industry in
Mhm.
Africa, and raising that struggle, in addition to saying it's not just Apple or Google or anything like that, it's the power dynamics, the relations of
Correct.
control, who owns the means of production in Congo, in order for that to be the fundamental question, right? And
Yeah.
so that to me, like, yes, I'm gonna buy a phone because that's how people communicate nowadays. But it's like, I want to have all the tech. I want
Right.
all of it. And I want all of the resources that come from that to benefit the people and places where this stuff, where the raw materials come from. And that's not what's happening right now.
Yeah. And I mean, that requires like government intervention,
Yeah.
because we're now just seeing that's why they're scared of the Sahel Alliance,
Mhm.
because they're really the first ones being like, yeah, nah, this France, you really thought that you would just take this extremely valuable, extremely rare resource and give us pennies for it. Like
Mhm.
you thought
Mhm.
that's ridiculous. But in other places in Congo, that is not ridiculous that they will accept pennies for, one of the most precious resources on the planet that people have to die to
Yeah.
mine.
Mhm.
Like, that's just the norm.
And
Like, that is the standard practice. And, there has to be a government that recognizes the absurdity of that, and that, the people should, like you said, own the resource and see the benefits of that resource, rather than, these tech companies, which are making billions and controlling like the geopolitical world in ways that are just obscene. Like Elon Musk gets to have like Starlink and gets to negotiate with governments about providing access to satellites, gets to get these billions of dollar funds to create his crappy ugly trucks, and to he gets to lie to people, to governments, and shut down whole transportation schemes that would benefit millions. Like, there was going to be a big what was it called? Like a monorail type thing between
Mhm.
California and Las Vegas. And he was like, oh no, I'm building a Hyperloop. He never built shit.
Right.
So he shut down, this program that like would have benefited so many people because of this pipe dream that he had that he wasn't capable of fulfilling. And so, I mean, they have way too much power, and these governments are just like supporting that. It's wild.
It
Yeah,
is
and
wild, but go ahead,
go ahead.
Carmen. No.
Oh, I was going to bring it back to Nigeria because we were talking about controlling resources. Like with the general of Nigeria is wants to build a refinery. There's no gold refineries in Africa, but that's where the gold is. And so now he's coming, which I believe is an extremely revolutionary act, saying that you will no longer, you know, uh, give us 80 cents for something that you sell for $2,000 to $3,000.
Mhm.
And that those, since we were refining here, the money would go back to the people.
Mm-hmm. But that's what nationalizing these resources. And so that's why when we talk about like the U.S. and all these other influences, the U.S. particularly gaining influence in Africa, is that they want to prevent the nationalization of resources, right? Like they want to be able to undermine, they want to be able to have these individual private negotiations with these
Mhm.
neocolonial leaders to facilitate all the resources. And if they can't deal, if the leader don't do what they're gonna do, they're gonna oust them, kill them, orchestrate a coup, do something, because they want to have access to these resources. And so they want to prevent, in all these cases, the emergence of the African revolutionary masses, the nationalization, which I'm sure everybody will be like, yes, we need to nationalize and use all the resources to build a road, provide electricity, create, plumbing,
Yeah.
Right.
infrastructure. I mean, these are basic. These are normal things that people need
Right.
and require.
Yeah.
But
Well,
We do
I
the
was
work anyhow.
right.
We do the
Yeah.
work. It's just doing the work for the people instead of doing the work for the colonizer.
Yeah. But also the thing about nationalization though is that it has to be under a
yes,
socialist
that's
government,
what I
Right.
mean. Yeah,
because right now, after Kwame Nkrumah, liberated Ghana and nationalized all these industries, and so Ghana has a rich history of nationalizing things. But when I was there, I was talking to some of the women cacao farmers, and they were telling me that yeah, cacao is nationalized. Like they don't get to set the price. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, in my head, I kind of assumed that was a good thing. And they were like, well, the Ghanaian government negotiates on behalf of the entire country with the chocolatiers, which with the Hershey's and the chocolate manufacturers, and they set these absurdly low prices, and so they have to constantly protest the government to say that the price of chocolate is too low. Please raise the price of chocolate so we can live. And the Ghanaian government is constantly shutting that down. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why there's often protests and anti-government activity in Ghana, is because the nationalized industries are controlled by the neoliberal government that places the priorities on the corporation at the expense of the people. So, again, I was talking about how in Sudan, like the revolution turned into something nefarious because of these external foreign interests that would come in and manipulate things. And we see that again with socialist governments, even, they become neoliberal because of the US intervention. And it's just kind of a sad state what's happened from Kwame Nkrumah to Ghana now, where it's basically it's one of the ECOWAS puppets, and the nationalized industries there are just not serving the people the way that they should. They're serving neoliberal interests.
I wrote an article about the Ghana stuff too, because the price is set by Europe, and the government the Ghanaian government negotiates based on that, and then they offer the people who are actually farming the cocoa, I can never say cocoa. These cacao, these low prices, and it's like, I'm glad to hear that there are mobilizations that are happening in Ghana, because this is constantly, when you have somebody else setting the price of your stuff, it's really ridiculous. And so, like, I totally hear you on the nationalization issue, because obviously, I think that, we as the African National Women's Organization understand African internationalism. We call for a united socialist Africa, where the borders are destroyed and that we have one government that can negotiate, and less about negotiation and more about turning inward and looking at how we can utilize the resources, the labor, the people, the land for the interest of the people in Africa. And so when we look at, under that sort of government, we want nationalization, because we understand it's going to improve the conditions of Black people, not just in Africa, everywhere. It's going to improve it's everywhere. Like, I want to see this. I want to live to this. But right now, we have to be made aware of all of the strategies that the enemy has toward us. And we can't be, French imperialism is bad, but British imperialism is good. Nobody ever says that, but like U.S. imperialism is good.
People do say.
But the Russia versus U.S., France, and England.
Yeah, well, on the Niger webinar that you mentioned earlier, I remember, some of the people were speaking French and it was translated, and people in the chat were like, "French is a colonizer language," and I'm like, dude, what are you speaking exactly?
English.
What are you speaking? Like, he was like upset that, the guy was speaking French, and it's like, he speaks what he speaks, right? It is a colonizer language, but people speak what they speak. You know what I mean? They can't also control that. But that just reminded me of that, because it's like, I was like, is it English is also a colonizer language? Like, it's for him to speak English? Like, come on.
We forget that the language that we speak is the colonizer language, because it's an English language, but definitely colonizer.
Is the colonizer language, really.
Right.
It's a mixture of all of that.
Yeah. So I did follow up with Comrade Alikia. She was having some technical problems with her Wi-Fi yesterday, I believe, and I think that it's not resolved. So I'm not sure if she's going to be able to join us, but we hope to have her on a future program, because we do want her to impart on us her Haiti expertise. But we did talk a little bit about Haiti with the Kenyan government sending its the Kenyan government sending their troops to Haiti. And we're gonna deepen that a little bit more too. But yeah, camera, Coco, I'm not sure what's going on with your camera, but we going. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
we got the low view.
Right.
That's the low view, girl.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it just shut down or something.
Okay.
But let's go ahead and go into our announcements.
Okay.
So We are going to have a question and answer portion, but before we go into the question and answer, we're going to go ahead and go into our announcements. Let me get them up here. It says it's being used by another device. All right. All right, so we call on African women worldwide to join the African National Women's Organization, the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States. ANWO is leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We are not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities, organizing for African liberation. Join the International Collective of African Women, building the revolutionary capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit anwoohuru.org/join. Right. Show your material solidarity with the work of the African National Women's Organization. We have big things planned for 2024, like beginning to work on our headquarters, organizing a flea market and farmers market to support the African economic development. We have events and travel plans. We are an organization of the African poor and working class. So we need your support to make these projects happen. If you can't become a member, consider becoming a sustaining donor with donation levels starting at just $5 a month, or renew your support today. We also set one-time donations of any amount. No amount is too little, too large, of course, not too large. So don't wait until this program ends. Start now. Donate now. You can donate at anwoohuru.org/donate, or cash up us at $ANWO-UHURU. That's ANWO Uhuru UHURU. All right. So yesterday has on her wear today. So wear your politics with ANWO. ANWO shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, mugs, hoodies, and even socks. Profits from the merch sales support the campaigns of ANWO, including hashtag ArrestCPS and Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective. Become a decolonizer and support ANWO's economic development project, Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body is a natural personal care has our natural personal care products that highlight indigenous and traditional care practices used by indigenous people all around the world. In addition, it features images and quotes of African revolutionaries. And listen, these are good products. From our butters to our conditioners to oils, purchase. Make your Decolonize has you covered from head to toe. So make your purchase of skincare. Make your next purchase of skincare products from us at decolonize.com. And if you're in the DC area, purchase from us in person starting January 2024. I know we brought up Penny Hess, but just want to make it known that hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. So she is one of the Uhuru Three. So support the Uhuru Three in the fight against the U.S. indictments. Defend the African freedom struggle. Defend the African liberation struggle. Defend the Uhuru movement. To find out more and how you can support, go to handsoffuhuru.org. Now, if you enjoyed today's program and would like to help us produce shows in 2024, consider volunteering with us. Don't consider it, just do it. Volunteer with us. And was looking for producers, interpreters. So if you French language or any indigenous languages. We also need chat moderators for our future broadcast and for our convention. Email us at info@annualuhuru.org if you'd like to share your skills. Also register today for Harriet's Daughters Book Club, which is a monthly virtual book club where African women and femmes discuss books that are centered on African liberation themes. Whether you read or not, come join us for a great discussion as on January 14, 2024, we'll be discussing Assata, an autobiography that is one of the leading women revolutionaries. Get ready to take a stand. ANWO calls on African women and our supporters worldwide to attend our annual Black Women's Convention. The 2024 theme is taking a stand against imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism. African women from every city, town, province, country, island, and village must attend this convention. Discounted early registration is available now up until December 30th. The convention will be a hybrid one online and in person in St. Louis, Missouri. To find more and to register, go to convention.annualuhuru.org. Don't wait, register now. Uhuru. Let me bring back up my fellow hosts here. And remember, if you are asking a question, enter your name, share your name and location, and then your question. Uhuru.
I didn't see any questions being asked. I saw some comments and some folks who were expressing their unity, and we appreciate that. We are planning. I just want to double down on this convention, y'all. So I'm gonna keep saying it. And you can't be watching this, you can't be appreciating this content, in my view, and not support this convention and bring as many African women to this convention, organize them to it, because this is about setting the tone. And we recognize that African women represent half, if not more than half, of the entire African nation and are engaged in so many different places and struggles against their own oppression, but also the struggles against the oppression of our entire people. And so it's really important that we bring all of these forces together through the African National Women's Organization, Black women taking a stand against imperialism, colonialism and neocolonialism, and really start to strategize, because we hope to launch an international campaign, have organizations join us, and we align ourselves on particular struggles that impact the lives of African people because of the colonial mode of production. So I'm just going to say this to you. We want African women there. We want our supporters there. We want anybody who believes in the freedom and liberation of African people, in particular, the ending of the special oppression of African women. So we know it's early for some folk. You can't think 3 months ahead, but we got to. So, register early, get it locked in, and just be among the first to be counted as registrants for this amazing convention that we have planned. So, so we are really looking forward to that, and we hope that you also enjoyed the commentary and discussions today. It's really important for us to bring this to you. And if I didn't have any, I don't see any comments or questions, but if we want to continue into the final 4 minutes about any last points about our discussions today regarding the African world and a little bit about Haiti, if we can contribute towards that. But let's do it. I'm gonna hand it over to Coco, see what you got to say, comrade. Last points or last thoughts. Can Coco hear us? Coco, last thoughts.
My last thoughts is everyone should be. My last thoughts are every African woman, femme supporter needs to be at the convention. But additionally, we should all be African internationalists. All of this we know that is a big assault going on, but it's we look at it very this place versus this place when really is an assault on Africa, and we all need to come together and develop one, as you said, one government, one people, one military to overturn this imperialism and colonialism. Uhuru.
Jay.
Well, I just want to highlight something you said earlier about how we need to be the ones that who are we are waiting for, and we are the protagonists in the decolonial struggle. And every generation, Frantz Fanon had a quote that every generation, I think it was him, had a quote that was like, every generation has its mission that they have to fulfill it. And this is our mission, is decolonial struggle, and every generation of Black people that have been colonized, our mission is going to be decolonial struggle. And so if you're going to be the protagonist in this story of liberation and in the protagonist in your own life, you have to join an organization. You can't do anything alone. You have to do it as a mass, as a group, and there has to be structure. And so people have this in their head that the perfect moment's going to come up and they're going to be step into that revolutionary moment, and that's not how it is. We need to build towards something. So I just encourage everyone to continue showing up to these lives, to come to the convention, and to really stay engaged, because as you said, like, we need to be building our own things and doing our own things, because what's going to happen is what we force to happen and not what they're going to let happen.
Mm-hmm. And my final thought is revolution. That's what we got to do.
Yeah.
Revolution. And that means, and the revolution starts now, comrades. And that means that we got to be in meetings. We got to plan our revolution. We got to plan for the destruction of colonialism. And like Comrade Jay said, it doesn't happen out of obscurity. It doesn't happen. You have to plan it. You gotta be focused. And all of this is the process of planning the revolution, planning to take control of our own lives, our own resources, and being prepared to govern ourselves.
Correct.
And that's what is going to take all of the things that we mentioned today, horrible, but also inspirational in some ways, that we've seen, that the way that we support that is by organizing ourselves and having more conversations like this, but also committing ourselves to action to overturn a relation of oppression that we currently experience. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we hope that you can register for our convention, support us in other different ways, and we'll see you next time in the new year, comrades. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.